The knock came hard and sudden, like a gunshot wrapped in knuckles, echoing through the thin pine walls of the cabin and tearing Ezekiel Crowe out of a sleep already crowded with ghosts. The wind was howling across the prairie outside, carrying the smell of dust and old rain, and for a long breath he lay still with his hand already reaching for the Colt on the table beside his bed. No one knocked this late unless trouble had lost its horse or death had found a reason to be polite. He swung his boots to the floor, joints aching like they remembered every mile he had ever ridden, and as he moved toward the door he saw the shadow beneath it, small, unsteady, and not alone when he pulled the door open. The lantern light fell on a woman standing stiff as a fence post. Her coat was too thin for the cold, her hair dark and tangled by wind, and in her arms she held a bundled baby wrapped in a faded blanket, her eyes lifted to his, steady but shining with something close to fear and something closer to resolve. Before he could ask her name or why she'd come, she spoke, her voice low but clear as creek water over stone. "Ezekiel Crowe," she said, and the way she knew his name hit him harder than the cold. She took one step forward and held the baby out just enough for the lantern light to catch the child's face. Then she said the words that split the night clean in two. "He looks just like you." For a moment the world tilted. The wind stopped howling, the lantern flame stilled, and Ezekiel forgot how to breathe. The baby stirred, small fists flexing, eyes opening slow and dark, and when the child looked up, Ezekiel felt it in his chest, that sharp punch of recognition no man could explain without sounding like a fool. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn brow, even that little crease between them that Ezekiel had seen in his own reflection since boyhood. He stepped back without meaning to, boot scraping wood, hand tightening on the doorframe. "You got the wrong man," he said, but his voice betrayed him. Rough and unsure, the woman did not move. She did not blink. She just watched him the way someone watches a truth finally catching up. Her name, she said, was Clara May Holloway, and she had ridden 3 days to find him, through dry creek beds and cold nights, past towns that remembered Ezekiel Crowe better for his temper than his kindness. She said she would not have come if there were any other choice. The baby shifted again and whimpered. An instinct older than thought pulled Ezekiel closer. He reached out without asking, brushing a finger against the blanket. The baby went quiet at once, eyes locking onto his, and the woman's grip tightened, like she feared he might vanish if she loosened her hold. "You left before I could tell you," she said, "back in Abilene. Before the fire, before the shots, before everything went wrong." Abilene hit him like a fist to the ribs. Memories rushed in, dusty and loud, whiskey on his breath, music spilling out of saloon doors, Clara May's laugh on a summer night. Soft but stubborn, he had not planned to stay there. Men like him never did, and when trouble came calling, he had ridden out before dawn, leaving nothing but tracks and regrets behind. "You can't be sure," he said, though his eyes never left the baby. Clara May's jaw tightened. "I am sure," she said, sure enough to cross half the territory with nothing but a horse and the truth. She shifted the bundle, finally stepping inside without waiting for permission. The cabin smelled of leather, smoke, and solitude, and suddenly it felt too small for what she had brought with her. She told him the baby's name was Samuel, born under a hard sky during a storm that shook the windows and rattled the rafters. She told him how Samuel cried until she sang, how he slept only when held close, how men had started asking questions, counting months, making threats. "The baby's father is a dead man," one of them said, and Clara May knew then she had to leave. Ezekiel listened in silence, every word landing heavy. He had buried his past in places like this, far from towns, far from women, far from mirrors, but here it was, breathing in his arms before he even realized she had placed the child there. Samuel was warm, solid, real, and when his tiny hand curled around Ezekiel's finger, something inside him cracked open. "You can send us away," Clara May said, her voice softer now, tired. "I ain't here to trap you, I just thought you should know." The fire popped in the hearth. The wind pressed against the walls, and Ezekiel stared down at the child who carried his face into the future, the life he had never planned for, never believed he deserved. The road had always been simpler. Ride on, keep moving, leave nothing behind that could bleed, but the weight in his arms was different, heavier than a saddle, heavier than a gun, heavier than every mile he had ever put between himself and consequence. He looked up at Clara May, seeing the dust on her boots, the fear she tried to hide, the strength that had carried her here, and he knew the night had changed him already outside. A horse snorted, shifting in the cold. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, lonely and wild. Ezekiel Crowe closed the door with his heel, shutting out the wind, shutting out the road. At least for now. He did not say yes, and he did not say no, but he pulled another chair to the fire and nodded toward it. "You better sit," he said. Long night ahead. Clara May sat, relief and worry crossing her face all at once, and as the firelight danced over the three of them, Ezekiel felt the past ride up hard behind him, and for the first time in a long time, he did not reach for his gun. He held the baby closer, knowing deep down that whatever came next, there would be no riding away from it. Morning came slow and grey, creeping through the cabin windows like it was unsure it belonged there. Ezekiel had not slept. He sat in a chair by the hearth with Samuel across his chest, afraid to move, afraid the child might vanish if he blinked too long. Clara May slept on the cot, boots still on, one arm flung out like she was bracing for a fall. And as the fire died down to coals, Ezekiel watched the rise and fall of the baby's breath, feeling something steady take root inside him, something stubborn and new. But peace never lasted long for a man with his history, and when the distant sound of hooves carried across the prairie, faint but unmistakable, his shoulders tightened. He shifted Samuel gently and stood, peering out the window. 3 riders, maybe 4, moving slow and deliberate, the kind of pace men took when they already knew where they were headed. Clara May woke when Ezekiel reached for his rifle. She sat up fast, eyes sharp despite the long night. "You heard them too," she said, more statement than question. Ezekiel nodded, jaw set. He had seen this kind of morning before, quiet, stretched tight like a wire ready to snap. He handed Samuel back to her. The baby fussed for half a breath, then settled when she whispered his name. Ezekiel pulled on his coat, checking the cylinder of his Colt, muscle memory guiding his hands. "Whoever's coming ain't lost," he said. Clara May swallowed. Her gaze flicked to the door, then to the window, then back to him. "They followed me, didn't they?" she asked. Ezekiel did not lie. He did not soften it. "Most likely," he said. And in that moment, the truth settled between them. Her past and his had finally collided, and the price would be paid by whoever stayed standing. The riders stopped 100 yards out, close enough to be seen, far enough to feel bold. Ezekiel stepped onto the porch, boots heavy on the wood, wind tugging at his coat like it wanted him back on the road. The men wore dust and hard expressions. One of them tipped his hat with a smile that held no warmth. "Morning, Crowe," he called. Funny how a man can run so far and still be found. Ezekiel did not answer. He rested a hand on the porch rail, relaxed but ready. The rider's eyes slid past him, toward the cabin door, toward Clara May inside. "We're here for the woman," the man said. "And what she's carrying, business matter. Nothing you need to get mixed up in." Ezekiel felt the old anger stir, that familiar heat behind his eyes. He thought of Abilene, of fire and gunsmoke, of how running had never really saved him. He stepped forward, boots creaking. "She's under my roof," he said, voice low. "That makes it my business." The smile faded, replaced by calculation. The rider spat into the dust. "You always were a fool for causes that ain't yours, Crowe," he said. "Nays Briggs, reckon you remember me." Ezekiel did. Briggs had been there the night everything burned, had been quick with a torch and slow with mercy. Memory sharpened Ezekiel's resolve. "You got no claim here," he said. "Turn around while you still can." Briggs laughed, short and sharp, then lifted a hand. The other riders spread out like wolves, and in that instant the morning shattered. Shots rang out, wood splintered, dust jumped. Ezekiel moved without thinking, diving off the porch, rolling hard, firing back, the crack of his Colt echoing across the open land. One rider fell, screaming. Another wheeled his horse, chaos replacing confidence. Inside the cabin, Clara May pressed Samuel to her chest, praying the walls would hold the fight ended as fast as it began. The riders had not expected resistance, not from a man they thought already half buried by his past. Briggs shouted retreat, cursing Ezekiel's name as they pulled back, dragging one wounded man between them, dust and anger trailing behind. Ezekiel stood alone in the yard, chest heaving, ears ringing, watching until they disappeared over the rise. He knew better than to believe it was over. Men like Briggs did not forget, they did not forgive. They came back heavier and meaner. He turned and went inside, bolting the door. Clara May's face was pale but steady. Samuel slept through it all, unaware of how close the world had come to breaking him before it ever knew him. Ezekiel sank into a chair, The weight of what he had done, settling deep. Staying meant war. Leaving meant abandoning them to it. You didn't have to do that, Clara May said quietly. Ezekiel looked at her, really looked, saw the strength worn thin by fear, the hope she tried not to show. He rubbed a hand over his beard. I ain't good at walking away, he said. Not anymore. She nodded, understanding more than he had expected. She told him then about the men chasing her, about money owed by a man long dead, about Samuel being leverage in a game she never agreed to play. Ezekiel listened, pieces clicking together. This wasn't just about the past, it was about control, about men who believed everything had a price, including blood. He stood and paced the small room, stopping by the window. The land stretched wide and empty, but he knew how fast emptiness could fill with danger. We can run, Clara May said. Head toward the mountains. Keep moving. Ezekiel shook his head, slow, thoughtful. Running just tells men like Briggs that you're scared, that they got you where they want you. He turned back to her, eyes hard but clear. If we're doing this, we do it right. Clara May felt a strange mix of fear and relief at his words. Samuel stirred, blinking up at them both, and Ezekiel crouched in front of him, lowering his voice. I spent my life riding away from things I broke, he said. Maybe it's time I stand for something I made. The words surprised him as much as they did her, but once spoken they felt solid, like ground underfoot. That night they planned by firelight. Maps spread, rifles cleaned, choices weighed. The cabin felt less like a hiding place and more like a fort. Outside the wind carried the promise of trouble, but inside something else grew, fragile but fierce. Ezekiel Crowe knew the road would call to him again. It always did, but for the first time he wondered what it might mean to stay, to build instead of flee, to teach a boy how to ride instead of how to run. Clara May watched him from across the room, seeing a man at a crossroads, and she knew whatever came next would change all of them, because Briggs would return, and when he did, Ezekiel Crowe would either fall like he always had, or stand like a man who finally had something worth dying for. They came at dawn, 3 days later, just as Ezekiel knew they would. The horizon bruised purple and red, dust lifting in a long angry line. More riders this time, 6 at least, maybe 8, moving with purpose. Briggs at the front, like a man who believed the world owed him obedience. Ezekiel stood on the porch with the rifle resting easy in his hands. Clara May inside, behind thick walls and barred windows, Samuel strapped close to her chest, the baby awake and quiet, as if he sensed the weight in the air. Ezekiel felt the old fear knock once, then he shut the door on it. This was his land now, borrowed or not, and he would not let it be taken without blood being answered by blood. Briggs reined in close enough for words, his smile gone, replaced by something raw and personal. You should have let us take what we came for, Crowe, he said. You always did like making things harder than they had to be. Ezekiel did not raise his voice. He did not rush. I spent my life letting men like you decide the rules, he said. Not today, Briggs signaled. The riders fanned out, rifles lifting, and the world exploded into noise, shots tearing through wood and air. Ezekiel firing from the porch, then dropping back, moving through the cabin like he knew every breath it took. Clara May pressed herself and Samuel into the far corner, whispering promises she prayed she could keep. Outside a horse screamed, inside the walls shook, and Ezekiel felt every second stretch long and sharp. No room for doubt, no space for regret. The fight turned brutal and close. Riders dismounting, boots pounding dirt, Ezekiel circling out the back, using rocks and scrub like old friends. He saw one man fall hard, another crawl, Briggs shouting orders that frayed with each shot. Ezekiel felt pain bloom along his arm, hot and wet, but he gritted through it. Pain was familiar, surrender was not. He caught Briggs in the open near the corral, both men slowing, breath ragged, guns low but ready. Briggs laughed again, wild this time. All this for a woman and a bastard child. Crowe. Ezekiel lifted his eyes, steady as stone. That child has a name, he said, and that name is mine. The gunshot echoed across the land. Briggs fell backward into the dust he loved so much. Eyes wide with a surprise he never earned. Silence came slow after, broken only by wind and the low creak of leather. Ezekiel stood there shaking, not from fear but from the sudden emptiness where danger had been. He made himself breathe, then turned back, toward the cabin, each step heavier than the last. Clara May burst out the door when she saw him, fear giving way to relief as she reached him. touching his face, his arm, making sure he was real. Samuel squirmed between them, fussing at the noise, and Ezekiel laughed, a rough, broken sound he had not made in years. He took the baby into his arms despite the blood on his sleeve, holding him close, the land around them scarred but quiet. As if it too was catching its breath, they buried the dead at the edge of the property. Shallow but honest, Ezekiel did not stay long over Briggs. Some men carried their end with them wherever they went. Clara May watched from the porch, Samuel asleep against her shoulder, and for the first time since Abilene, the future did not feel like a trap. Ezekiel returned to the cabin, cleaned his wound, and sat by the fire as night fell, the stars sharp and endless above. He told Clara May things he had never told anyone, about the running, about the anger, about how he never thought he was meant to leave anything good behind. She listened without judgment, without fear, and when she spoke of staying, of planting roots where blood had been spilled and survived. Days turned into weeks. The cabin changed, not in its bones, but in its breath. Laughter found corners it had never touched. Samuel grew stronger, louder, his eyes always following Ezekiel, learning his face the way calves learn their mothers. Ezekiel learned too, how to hold without breaking, how to stay without choking on it, how to wake each morning knowing he would not ride away by nightfall. Clara May planted a small garden, Ezekiel fixed the fence, and the land began to look less like a hiding place and more like a home. Men still whispered his name in nearby towns, but now they said it different, not as a warning, but as a line not to cross. One evening, as the sun burned low and red, Ezekiel sat on the porch with Samuel on his knee, the baby reaching for the wide-open sky. Clara May leaned against the doorframe watching them, and Ezekiel felt something settle in his chest, solid and earned. He knew trouble would come again someday. It always did, but it would find him standing, not running. He bent close to Samuel and spoke soft words meant to last. "This world will try to take from you," he said. "Don't let it tell you who you are." Samuel gurgled like he understood, fingers gripping Ezekiel's shirt with fierce trust. Long after the fire burned down and the stars claimed the sky, Ezekiel Crowe lay awake, listening to the steady breathing of the people he had chosen. The knock that split his night had split his life too, but not in the way he once feared. Some men are born riders, some are born fighters, and some become fathers the hard way, through blood and choice, and staying when running would be easier. Ezekiel closed his eyes knowing his name would live on, not in whispered warnings or burned-out towns, but in a child who looked just like him, and in the land where he finally stood his ground.